Hey, this is the Europeans podcast. I'm Katy Lee, and I would love it if you could check out my conversation with the incredible Louisa Neubauer. Louisa was one of the defining faces of the climate movement when the school strikes were kicking off about 7 years ago, and she remains one of the most powerful voices out there still fighting for this planet. This is a really wide-ranging conversation in which we talk about the tough moment that the climate movement is facing right now, starting with a question that hits at the heart of everything.
What is hope? Do we understand hope as a promise or as a guarantee that is made to us that there will be a happy end that will be delivered to our doorsteps?
We also dig into why lobbyists are showing up to climate conferences in huge numbers and what that says about the influence that activists might actually have.
I mean, there's a reason why more than 1,000 fossil fuel lobbyists would go to the climate conference in Berlin. It's not that they find to have a good, party down there and chill at the beach or in the Amazon, but they are afraid about the decisions that can be made there.
And finally, Louisa gives some of the most grounded, empowering advice that I've ever heard about how anyone can get involved in climate advocacy.
First of all, I would recommend to not fall for this trap where they tell you need to be a perfect environmentalist in order to gain the right, earn the right to be an activist, to be outspoken, to be authentic. We do not need 3 perfect activists, we need 1 million imperfect activists.
Stay with us. I really think this is an exceptional conversation. And if you'd like more in-depth interviews with the people changing our world, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Louisa, so nice to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you were one of the key faces of Friday for Future in Germany a long, long time ago, back in 2018, when we saw this big wave of mass activism, these huge protests demanding action on climate change. And governments at the time, at least here in Europe, were actually making changes, including in your own country, Germany, carbon taxes, emission caps, big concrete things. What did it feel like at the time? Did it feel like we were on the brink of something revolutionary happening?
I've been asked many questions, but never this one. It's a really beautiful one. So I think when you're inside that kind of, I would say close to revolutionary momentum and building up something with, tens of thousands of other people who've all never done this before, or most of them have never done this before. To me, it was almost impossible to feel like surfing on a green wave. It felt like we were trying to build a cathedral, but we'd never done this before. And the ground was sand. And we attempted to build higher and higher and higher and higher while having to kind of hold everything together at every single moment, because every day it could collapse completely and you didn't know what you were standing on. And we didn't have the time, we didn't have the kind of the energy to kind of take that moment and look out to what we'd kind of built or how far we'd come. So that viewpoint was, for me at least, quite inaccessible. So while I look back and I appreciate so much what had been happened, what so many people made possible together, it's not that I would consider it to be, emotionally spoken, a very content time.
Yeah, it must be strange to look back at it now. I mean, to whatever extent this green wave you talk of did or didn't happen, it certainly doesn't feel like it's happening now. When did you first notice the way that action on climate change was kind of slipping down the to-do list of governments? Like, is there a specific moment you can pinpoint, or has it been a kind of gradual, imperceptible thing?
That's a very good question. And I obviously understand that this is a question that many people ask now, because now we see that climate is being ranked down in politics and public discourse. And yet I would just note that this isn't the first time that this ranking or rating down is happening. The first time I noticed that was in 2016, when the Paris Agreement had just been decided on. There was this world momentum. Everyone was talking about Paris. It was just so incredibly hopeful. And 1.5 degree as a promise to the world to basically leave no one behind, to say, we're going to fight for you guys no matter where you live. That felt historic to me. And I guess many other young people and me, we felt like this is a tipping point. This is a moment where we're going to focus on what is most important. And the first thing that then basically happened on a global stage was Donald Trump being elected and immediately leaving the Paris Agreement, which obviously to many felt like, okay, well, great, thanks for nothing. We had this Paris Agreement, but now that's, gone down the hill. And the most important thing was then that people, including myself, but obviously many others, that we looked at that, we considered how history in the positive sense and in the negative sense had been made. And we decided not to let that stop us, but to then try even harder to bring climate to the agenda. And when we started as a climate movement, when I started with my climate activism, it was completely utopian to consider young people in the climate space, to consider something like a country of Germany leaving coal energy behind. It was impossible to consider even the existence of a climate momentum that goes around the world. So now, as I see climate policies being watered down, as we see the greenwashing kind of rising, beyond everything we've been seeing before, as we're seeing these lies, these excuses being made, I notice that everywhere, and I think it has always been there, but it had always existed before that green wave. And so right now, for me, most exciting is to think about what needs to happen so we kind of get to that mountaintop again.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think needs to happen? Are you still hopeful, even though we're seeing things like, I mean, here in Europe, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw centre-right members of the European Parliament teaming up with the far right to roll back climate regulation. The vibe might have shifted with Trump a few years ago already, but here in Europe, it does feel like it is shifting definitively right now. Do you still see reasons for hope in the midst of all this? Like, what are you clinging to? What's driving you forward?
Very good question. I guess the first question here would be, what is hope? Do we understand hope as a promise or as a guarantee that is made to us that there will be a happy end that will be delivered to our doorsteps and we can kind of take it and then sit back down on the couch? That for me isn't hope. That maybe is very convenient optimism. But hope for me is not a state in which everything works out fine, or that kind of thing I subscribe to get like immediate good news every day delivered to me. But hope for me is a promise that I make to the world, that I will keep trying, and that I will keep looking out for good people and good moments and good changes. And that means actively challenging my perspective on things. So say when we look in the world and we look at the European Parliament, what you just mentioned, we see, wow, that's really dangerous what's happening there. Yet if we just zoom out and maybe not consider the last months, but the last 10 years, we understand the fact that we are discussing climate as we are discussing it now, the fact that the far right can even team up to water down or dilute climate policies is only possible because we're doing so much more in terms of climate than even imaginable 10 years ago. And so for me, hope has to do with me doing something, with me teaming up, with looking out for the we. So who is the we that is doing something? And then really, looking closely. And that means maybe zooming out, maybe zooming in, and making it not so easy to tell that very singular story of things going either downhill or either, all the way up. And when I consider that, there's just so much reason for hope. There is, the fact that how far we've come, the fact that people keep trying, the fact that what would have been maybe very normal thing to do. Say the German government last week decided to give 350 million euros in subsidies to the flying companies, the aviation companies in Germany. That could have happened 10 years ago, just like that. But the difference is that today this caused a huge outcry, and politicians and parliamentarians from all sides kind of teaming up saying, well, that's a bit ridiculous now, right? There's not the time to give out these tax presents to some of the dirtiest companies without any conditions. We just don't do that. And so I can consider that kind of money transfer as being absolutely hopeless or a reason for hopelessness. Or I can consider the outrage around it to be something that is quite hopeful because that is something we've achieved, for instance.
That's a good change of perspective. I think I needed to hear that. But it is so crazy frustrating to see governments like Germany's doing things like that,
Yeah,
right? Like, I
it's
mean,
very
we're seeing
frustrating.
subsidies for fossil fuels that we weren't seeing maybe a few years ago. Why are politicians doing this at the moment? I mean, not so long ago, we had a lot of European politicians arguing that like mass green investment is going to boost the economy.
Mm.
And now suddenly they're all saying, oh, well, cost of living, all of this stuff is too expensive. Like, why has the logic changed, the way that they talk about these things?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I guess that's a whole new conversation that we could just possibly spend days on. But maybe just to name a few points on this. One is the cost of things has changed, because when the promises were made, a lot of the investments were theoretical investments, promising that things will happen. That's politically spoken a very cheap thing to do, because you get the praise and you don't get the bill attached. And now it's pay time, and now we see these investments must be made. And we are in this very strange crunch time where fossil-free investments don't pay off immediately. Building that railway that is super expensive, investing in that kind of carbon-free chemistry industry, that is huge money that is being spent, and it will pay off over decades in the best sense, but not tomorrow. So in this time where we are seeing, okay, the world is technically and mostly theoretically, but also in some places practically moving away from fossil fuels, we must make investments that are real investments that don't pay off, and that they cannot justify with the benefits, financial benefits or economic benefits immediately. You must be able to justify them with that vision attached to it. That is, by the way, how we got into the climate crisis in the first sense. So why did fossil fuel cars or coal energy, broke through in Europe? Not because it was the cheapest thing to do back then, that was basically horses and forests and woods and stuff. But back then, politics decided to say, okay, we're going to invest in that because we are sticking to that vision. We're defending that vision, and this is good for our country, no matter what you might think about that today. So back then, the whole era of fossil fuel industrialism and capitalism that really kickstarted, not just with reason arguments and kind of calculations about costs and benefits, but it started really with this big idea, okay, of we're going to do something big. And that is basically what we need in addition to the kind of fossil-free economics. And there's a second reason why political arguments have changed so drastically, is that obviously lobbying has come in, and fossil fuel companies that a few years ago were kind of not quite aware of that kind of climate shock that went through the world, they have woken up and they understand they need to fight for their lives, which is correct, because decarbonization means the end of the business model of so many of those, hugely powerful companies. I mean, there's a reason why more than 1,000 fossil fuel lobbyists would go to the climate conference in Belém. It's not that they find to have a good, party down there and chill at the beach or in the Amazon, but they are afraid about the decisions that can be made there. And obviously, the third big reason is that that at least a fraction of politics is, I would say, stuck in a fossil fuel ideology, where not just in facts and data, but in your very emotional approach to the world, you find fossil fuel solutions are safer, are economically more valuable, and are better, whatever that means for a country, than any fossil-free logic. And maybe the best example for that is the debate about the aesthetics of wind turbines. So why is it that every wind turbine has to be justified in terms of aesthetics, and no politicians ever questioned whether a coal mine is actually good for the landscape or not? But here we see,
I mean, I think they're really pretty. Like, they're nice to look at.
But that's a fossil fuel ideology where you see the oil catastrophes, the gas pipelines blown up, but the debate in politics happening whether a solar panel is reliable or not, but because there could be some shade on it. And that is where we see this is about ideology, that's about that deep belief that fossil fuels are something, give us something that fossil-free solutions cannot deliver.
Climate experts, diplomats, government advisors, lobbyists, they are all meeting in Brazil as we speak at the COP, this big annual UN climate conference. By the time this interview goes out, everyone would have packed up and gone home. But right now, what are you hoping is going to come out of this year's COP?
This year's COP is obviously crucial for many of the financial talks, about the adaptation talks, so the question of who pays for the damages, through climate catastrophes. It's about indigenous rights, about the rainforest. I would say one crucial to do for this year's COP is to make sure the world understands Donald Trump is an outlier and a planetary majority is moving towards decarbonization and a world without fossil fuels. And Donald Trump doesn't represent a global discourse. He doesn't rule a global kind of community. And the kind of this fossil fuel clownery that we're seeing, this bullshitting, this mocking, this that kind of profound disrespect towards nature, planet, human rights, indigenous rights, the very essence of who we are as people, that is happening, but it is not defining who we are and where we are going. And that is the challenge for this year's COP. That's why it's so important to just have states there to say, no, we're keeping going. We haven't agreed on everything. Yes, absolutely. And we have lots to talk about. And there's greenwashing and there's a lobbyist. But we're doing that now. And that, I think, is a kind of wake-up call that we desperately need looking around the world.
I'm curious about what your own journey has been like as a climate activist. How has your own understanding of climate change and climate action changed over time? Like, are there things that you have changed your mind about? What do you see now that you didn't see a few years ago?
Probably the most profound thing that has changed for me is my personal understanding of science and facts in the climate discourse. So when I started as a climate activist and I had my first meetings with, heads of state, Macron invited us to the Elysee and Obama showed up and we met Merkel and all these people. And I was convinced that the absence of ambitious climate politics and the absence of sustainable climate discourse was the consequence of almost a political error where some of the climate data just been not acknowledged enough or overseen. So I thought they'd just kind of forgotten that in a drawer. And we need to kind of put it out again and say, hey, there's this thing. It doesn't make sense what you do right now because there can't be strong economies or, strong democracies even when, the planet's on fire. That's just not working out.
Just a reminder.
And I really thought, and that's, imagine, I'm this generation Merkel. I didn't know any other chancellor than Merkel, and I was convinced about the kind of politics of the reason. And that obviously was hugely naive. And I would say also, looking back, I find cute, in a cute way, part of my very strong democratic belief that politics was really trying to do the best it could. And if it didn't, it was just like this error that we had to correct. I didn't back then think about these huge kind of systems that are designed to fail many people and about the politics of lobbyism and so on. So back then when we started talking about the facts and the data, I couldn't understand the outcry, the backlash, the hatred. Today, when I go to any public event, when I go to climate protest right now, I have to bring personal security people with me because that is how much I am attacked in the public, not by a majority, obviously not, but by this small, very violent minority. And so I couldn't understand that. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks. I couldn't understand that. And I think what has changed for me is the understanding that when we talk about climate, when we talk about climate science, we never talk about climate and climate science alone. We talk about feelings, we talk about emotions, we talk about emotional detachment to a understanding of identity, of culture, of a country, of who we are, what makes us strong. Being an activist in Germany for climate means facing the fact that for an identity of our country, fossil fuels meant escaping fascism and our deeds of the Second World War and finally becoming someone that you can talk to again. That was cars and coal and this industry that was built up on the, on the backs of these bodies of those men and these minds. And, I can come around and show data and say, hey, guys, there's a calculation. It kind of doesn't make sense. It's getting really expensive. But as long as we don't have an alternative vision, an alternative identity to offer, as long as we also maybe ignore that in order to change the path we're on, we must be able to pay respect to that path because it has been built up with people's sweats and efforts. I think all these things kind of came up quite a bit later. And that has really changed my understanding of what it is that we do when we talk about all these kind of political terms, net zero, decarbonization, fossil fuel, that effectively it's something that goes much further and that requires much more than the best available science.
A lot of climate activists have rallied behind the Palestinian cause since 2022. When October 7th happened, you expressed a lot of support for the victims of that attack, and you've gained some criticism from others inside the activist movement for what they have seen as too pro-Israel a position. I wondered, what your thoughts are on how all of this has been covered, if your thoughts have changed about all of this.
Well, definitely my thoughts have changed, and I hope many people's thoughts have changed after what we saw in the last 2 years. What happened, I think, after October 7th is that in Germany, as a country that obviously has a big backstory to everything, there was a enormous expectation being set on people like me to be there where the German state would be. And that would mean for our government, for many politicians, would mean standing unconditionally, and that is the crucial term here, unconditionally on the side of Israel. Whereas in many parts of the world, obviously, the eyes were on everything that happened in Gaza and Palestine. And as a climate movement working in Germany, that was a impossible position to be in, as I found. And I didn't have the vision, but also, to be very honest, not the courage to kind of take a step back and reflect on that position. And we thought that if we just clarify that we stand in solidarity, that our hearts are big, that we are, that we are seeing the suffering that is happening everywhere, that we could continue working as we did. What I completely underestimated is how strong these forces were that tried to streamline, I would say, that one singular story that would be told about October 7th, where a lot of the suffering that happened on many ends would not be visible. And that it would have taken many more people to break through that. And luckily enough, many people, especially in Germany, did a lot of that very courageous work to very much challenge singular narratives and try to at least make space for multiple sufferings and their stories and their backgrounds. And I'm very thankful for that. What I see around in communities here in Germany, and that I think is very hopeful, is that there is a real attempt to both reflect what has happened, to take responsibility for what people should be taking responsibility, also happening in politics more and more, and working towards a understanding of maybe that critical solidarity where we do not have to agree with everything and everyone in order to align on, the very basic ends that we're fighting on.
Well, I want to thank you, Louisa, for taking the time to speak to me today and to answer my questions. So much honesty and vulnerability. Just a final question for you. We have a fairly young audience for this podcast, and they care a lot about climate change, but not everyone knows how to get active, how to make a difference. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed. What would you say to encourage people who want to join the climate movement in some way, but they don't even know where to start?
First of all, I would recommend to not fall for this trap where they tell you need to be a perfect environmentalist in order to gain the right, earn the right to be an activist, to be outspoken, to be authentic. We do not need 3 perfect activists. We need 1 million imperfect activists. People that take that one step outside the comfort zone and then the other one. Second thing, 50% of activism is showing up. So look up, where is a meeting happening? Where is a Zoom call I can join in? Where is that gathering? Where is that protest? And, get off the couch and and show up. That's a crucial thing to do, is to be there. And then we need people to be involved sustainably. So don't think about that one singular thing to do, that one action, but maybe consider more, what do you want? What kind of routine do you wish in your life? Because effectively, let's be honest, we're going to spend the rest of our lives in the climate crisis, and we're going to see devastation that we can't even imagine yet. And it's going to be horrible. It's going to be horrible for the hearts and the souls and the minds. And we will have to fight hard not to lose our minds and not to lose our empathy and not to lose our sight for the world. Because if we stop looking at the bad stuff that's happening, it's going to be tough to see the good stuff that's happening. So we're going to keep our eyes open. And for that, we need spaces and places where we are safe and where we can, be courageous, and where we can train to be courageous, and where we can reflect on what stops us from being courageous. And that means find that group of people, find that one friend, maybe that one talking person to talk to, find that one ally or that collective that will hold you accountable if you don't show up, that will help you to show up, that will inspire you to even maybe, grow beyond what you've been seeing before, and that will make it hopefully fun to do stuff. And we need people to have the best time, because obviously, it's hard enough to be out there. So we must make it fun. We must have the better music, and we must have the better parties. And that's a real task to dive to. And then I can only say, choosing the life of activism has been the best decision of my life. It's been the most liberating thing I could have done for myself, knowing that I do not have to watch in silence as things unfold. I can be part of those who try to create some hope.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've certainly created a little bit of hope for me today. So it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.